I knew I had to go because my life depended on it.
At 17, Natasha was swept up in a fairy tale romance that would change her world forever. What initially attracted you to John?
He was 14 years older than me. He was charming. He was texting me multiple times an hour, and that smothering felt flattering.
But it wasn't long before this relationship took a darker turn.
He had full control. I wasn't allowed to make eye contact with people, I wasn't allowed to interact. He would withhold water for 12 hours at a time. He turned around with an intimate image of me and was like, "You're going to do what I tell you to, otherwise I'll show your parents what a little slut you are." I knew I had to go because my life depended on it. And by this point he's ringing me and I'm like, ignore it, ignore it. And I turn around and he's in the nursery behind me and I ran.
Natasha, you and I have met before.
Yeah.
We were part of a Naked Threat campaign, and essentially this was kind of pioneered and spearheaded by you and your experience with intimate image abuse. Should we talk about where it all began for you? Back in 2006 when you met your first husband, how old were you?
17. So I was just doing my own thing, doing a bit of modelling, buying and selling horses down in West Sussex. And love bombing wasn't a term then, but that's exactly what he did. You know, he was texting me multiple times an hour. You know, he just completely took over my life.
What initially attracted you to John?
I was flattered. He was 14 years older than me. And also, I've got ADHD and autism, and I think he completely played into that. He completely played into the vulnerability of never quite being sure about a situation, and that smothering almost felt flattering, made me feel good, and I think he built upon that.
How quickly did your relationship with him escalate?
So I met him on the 2nd of November 2006, and by the 2nd of January 2007 I was living with him.
Wow, that's quick.
He proposed to me with a ring for his ex. Didn't know that at the time. He was still regularly seeing his ex and meeting up with her for sex.
Wow.
His ex-wife was the devil. You know, she'd taken his child from him, and it was also very unfair. And I completely got sucked into his woe is me. The world has been so mean to him, and all he wants to do is keep me safe. And then before I knew it, I wasn't going to do my intensive driving course. I changed my email address, changed my mobile number. And there were people as recently as this year who have got in touch with me through social media and gone, "We thought you died. You just disappeared."
Were your family and friends concerned at how quickly this relationship was escalating?
Absolutely. My friends were all, you know, and my ex-boyfriend at the time was like, "This isn't normal. This isn't normal behaviour." I stopped working. I was at home all the time. I was either arguing with my parents because it was something he instigated, or I just wasn't seeing them. You know, I would come downstairs and I'd be wearing something, and, you know, I've always loved fashion, and I'd come downstairs and he'd be like, "Are you going out in that?" And I'd go back upstairs and I'd get changed as something baggier or whatever, and he'd be like, "Oh, you didn't need to get changed," but I knew I did. And it was all of those little things. And it was about 6 months in, and I wanted to go meet my mum at the train station. I said I was going, he said I wasn't, I said I was. And he turned around with an intimate image of me and was like, "You're going to do what I tell you to, otherwise I'll show your parents what a little slut you are."
Wow.
And it was like a bucket of ice cold water had been thrown over me. And I just stood there thinking, I cannot comprehend my parents seeing that.
Why would he do that, do you think? Was it a method of intimidation or?
Yeah, I think so. I think it was just his level of control. He would take pictures of me and circulate them on Plenty of Fish, which was like the only online dating thing then. You know, occasionally we'd have an argument and he'd be like, "Well, I'm just going to send all these pictures to your entire phone book."
What was he like publicly?
Charming is what everybody says. You know, if somebody had said, "Are you being abused?" I would have been like, "No," because in my head I wasn't. You know, if he met you, he would laugh and joke with you. He'd pull out a chair if you wanted to sit down.
Abusers often are really good at masking.
Yeah. I literally have no idea when he began raping me, because at first it was just coercion into sex. And he'd be like, "My ex was always up for it. You know, if you were a better girlfriend, do you not find me attractive?" And then when I fell pregnant, he would withhold water for 12 hours at a time. So he was a long distance courier, and he could go from anywhere from Heathrow to Aberdeen. And when he would, he'd make me stay awake in the van. If I fell asleep in the van, he'd swerve the van, bang my head off the window so I'd wake up. But then when he pulled over and went to sleep, he'd tell me to sit there and stay awake. And it was all just methods of control, but I'm carrying his child. And so then it became, nobody wants a single mother. The day I had my daughter, I hemorrhaged. He made me stay at home and clean it up before I could go to hospital. And so we went to hospital, I got put on a drip induction. He went off at about 2:00 in the afternoon, told me not to have the baby whilst he was gone. I've been told that he went and had sex with one of his exes during that time. He came back. Thankfully, she was delivered and she was fine. I just looked down at her and was like, it's my daughter. And his first words were, don't just stare at it, shut it up. And then he walked out the room.
I can't even imagine the stress that you went through after having the baby and having such a traumatic birth, considering having what sounds like the most traumatic pregnancy.
I never even processed that that was physical abuse because I didn't have, bust lip, black eyes, I didn't have broken bones, I didn't have bruises. He never threw me down the stairs. And I grew up with, domestic violence. That was the term. And so for me, it wasn't violent what he was doing. It was all very, very covert and very slight and very, there was the financial abuse. I had no bank account. I had no access to money. It was emotional.
Can I just ask, just to get an idea, at this point, what is the relationship like on a day-to-day basis?
He had full control by that point. I fell pregnant again, went all the way through my pregnancy, sat next to him, do a multi-drop.
So you would do all his work for him?
Yeah. So every morning would start off, I would go on AA route planner, optimise all the postcodes for the multi-drop parcels, which could be about 160 to 180. Then the guy would drop them off in big sacks. I would drag them in the house. I would unpack them all.
And you're pregnant at this point?
Yeah. Scan them all, stack them all, put them in the car, get the clipboard ready. Then he would come downstairs and be ready to go. And then I would have to sit in the passenger seat of the car holding the clipboard. I wasn't allowed to make eye contact with people. I wasn't allowed to interact, only if it was absolutely unavoidable. I used to have to scrub the house on my hands and knees with neat bleach on the floor, have to hoover up to 7 times a day. That's what he wanted. A good day then looked like me getting up, getting to eat, getting to sleep.
Just surviving.
Just surviving.
Shall we talk about you leaving and the kind of lead up to you leaving, the birth of your second child?
So the day I went into labour with my second child, I was 10 days overdue. I've done all the parcels, I've cooked dinner, and I'm upstairs and I'm like, I'm in labour. So off we went to the hospital, my son's born, I popped him in my arms and I took a photo and he replied with, great, get your shit, you're coming home. And I was like, I've lost quite a lot of blood and I've had stitches. And he was like, yeah, but who'll do the parcels tomorrow if you're not here?
So you were expected to go and do your ex's job for him the day after you just had a child?
Yeah. I got wheelchaired to the car, drove home. We're talking like 2 a.m. and I'm tired. So I crawl into bed, literally lay there, and he turns over and decides to rape me and rip my vaginal stitches.
Wow.
I knew I had to leave, but I didn't know how.
How did you get yourself to that place mentally where you felt that you could walk away at that moment? What did that take from you?
The first time I wasn't prepared and I went back. And we got to the Christmas and I remember Christmas Eve, I said I needed to go to the Tesco that was just around the corner. And he was like, nope, you're not going. And I was like, do you know, at this point, I'm done. And I'm like, do you know what? Yes, I am though, actually. And he said something from the back door, and I can't remember now whether it was whore or slut or something like that. And my daughter spun around on her chair and she went, don't call my mummy that. And he ran across the room and he went nose to nose with her. And I just remember in that moment realising that my kids were going to grow up and either accept abuse or perpetrate abuse, and I knew I had to go.
But also, I suppose in that moment as well, you must have realised it's not just me that he can harm.
Exactly. So from the minute I went back the first time, his new threat was, if you ever leave me again, I'll kill the kids and make you live with it.
How do you feel when he's saying these things to you?
Absolute sheer terror, because I knew he'd do it. So about the 10th of January, I'm not 100% sure, but before I left on the 16th, I made a joke about Ryan Reynolds, and he punched me about 16 times in the arm and kicked me in the shin. And I was like, and now the void has been breached.
He'd still, at this point, he'd choked you, he'd raped you.
Yeah.
But in your mind at that point, you weren't really registering it as a physical abuse.
You make allowances for it. It was like this survival instinct kicked in. It was like, he's now hit you. And I thought, do you know what? I'm going to Google what's domestic abuse. And so I Googled it and I found Refuge's website and I went through all these things and I was like, that's me. And I phoned the domestic abuse helpline and she went, Natasha, do you think this is okay? Now you've said all this out loud. And I was like, no. And I was like, but I need to leave and I don't know how. And she was like, why don't you go to the police? She said, you could go to the police and you could get a non-molestation order. I didn't realise it was like a civil thing at the time. And, you've got to remember that I've had 8 years of nothing. I know nothing other than what he's allowing me to manage. So I was like, okay. So I phoned a non-emergency line and the police staff I spoke to was fantastic. She said, right, I'll make you an appointment for tomorrow morning. And I thought, right, he used to like to play bill bingo. Which bill would he pay? Which one wouldn't he pay? And then I would have to go to them and go, I'm really sorry, this is the problem. And I'm like, right, we're going to have enforcement action from the council tax. So I take our daughter to school, take my son to nursery, and I turn around and he's in the nursery behind me. He's like, where are you going? Why you got your handbag? And I'm like, fuck. And I said, well, I've got to walk to town, because by this point, if it was an absolute essential, he'd let me go. Mm-hmm. And he was like, why? And I said, I need to go to the council offices, because if we don't pay this, they're gonna, So he was like, I'll drive you. And I'm thinking, so he drives me into Horsham and I walk into the council offices, I look at the woman and I'm like, can I take a seat, please? And she's like, looks at the window, yeah, of course. Bless her, that poor woman still probably is like, what? And I sat down and I saw him pull off and I ran because my life depended on it. And I managed to get into the police station and by this point he's ringing me. And I'm like, ignore it. And I went in and I spoke to the police officer and he's scrolling the screen and I now know he was scrolling his extensive record for violence against women and girls.
Right. So you've given the police officer your ex-husband's name at this point?
Yeah. So I'm sat there and this police officer shows what I would call professional curiosity. And he just went, Natasha, is there anything else? And everything just came out. The next thing I know, my ex has managed to get my kids from their childcare placements and has gone missing. And the police officer's on the phone and is like, where are they? And they're like, we don't know, he's not at home, we're driving around, we're looking. And I just remember going, he's going to kill them, he's going to kill them, he's going to kill them.
So because you hadn't answered the phone in that period of time?
31 times he called me. And they found him up a side street with my kids. And they got hold of him. And I never looked back.
How did you feel?
I felt absolutely terrified because I still doubted myself. And the prosecution dragged on for 3 years. During the investigation, he took the number plate of our car because he didn't know where we lived and gave it to people on the internet. So they would phone the police and report seeing violence against my kids. And the following March, we finally got to the prosecution. So I went in, I was cross-examined for the whole court day.
How was that experience?
It was, why didn't I disclose being raped to the National Domestic Abuse Helpline? They tried to lead me on some questions with like, well, you did have sex with him the night before you went. Was that rape?
Personally, I spoke to so many victims and it always sends shivers and shudders inside me when I hear how victims are cross-examined and how they are treated in the courtroom, almost like they are deceptive.
There were so many things, but I challenged it. And I did my piece, and at the end, he was found guilty of 3 out of 4 counts of rape, 1 of sexual assault by penetration. He was found to be a danger in the pre-sentencing report. So when he was given 12 years custodial, they said it would need to be 8.5 before he could be considered for parole. And he was put on the sex offenders register for life. He went to prison, and I sort of sat there and went, right, where do I go from here? Do I be the voice that I wish I heard when I was in that situation? And that's what I decided to do. So I got in touch with Refuge, and in my time with them, just were involved in, raised £500,000 in the first lockdown with Chelsea FC. We did the Naked Threat campaign. I went to the Metropolitan Police after Sarah Everard was murdered, and I ended up being involved in their community work and having a hand in training 21,000 of their officers.
That is incredible, Natasha.
And I am the patroness of Survivor Space Oxfordshire.
So your ex-husband, he's in prison now.
Mm-hmm.
When is he due to be released?
So his latest release date will be 2030. When he's released, he'll be on licence for 3 years, and we'll go from there.
How do you feel about the concept of him being released?
I'm concerned for women out there. Somebody who is really vulnerable and flattered by his charm and doesn't realise the risk he poses, that scares me. He was so good at what he did. And it wasn't until after I left that I found out this long chain of women he'd done it to before me.
I suppose my question to you is, if someone is watching this and is going through abusive behaviour with their partner or an ex-partner, what is your advice?
Trust your gut. You're not alone. And reach out. And anybody who is worried about somebody with abuse, which I think is really valid too, you don't have to be the expert. Know where to find them. Signposting is so important, If you think somebody is being abused, signpost them or go to these organisations and speak to them.
And don't be afraid to do so, I think.
Absolutely.
So many people are afraid. I actually did some active bystander training recently.
Oh yeah, me too. Me too.
And it's really interesting because people think that they would get involved and people like to think they would help. In a conversation like this, oh yeah, I definitely help, definitely. But actually, in the reality of a situation when you have to step up, a lot of the time people don't. And the more people that are around you and the more people that know or see the behaviour, the less likely one person is to stick their head above the parapet and actually take action. Absolutely. So I think know the signs, understand the signs. We should all educate ourselves on what domestic abuse and domestic violence looks like.
And we need to look beyond those, those bruises.
Absolutely.
And the blood, and that we need to look beyond that. We need to look a little bit deeper, that financial abuse, the tech abuse, it's everywhere now. I agree. Natasha, thank you so much for today. It's been so eye-opening. And can I just say, you are such an inspiration to so many people out there. You're such an inspiration to me. So thank you so much for being so open and so raw and vulnerable. And I really think that your voice is helping so many people and so many survivors of abuse. Thank you. I really appreciate it. It's important that you're doing this work and you're sharing it and you're getting people's voices out there. So thank you as well for having me.